My question to you is, how do you feel if you hear we must modernize machismo or let's modernize machismo?
Sabrosura pa' ti que.
Hola manis, welcome to Café con Pam, where we share our stories over cafecito. Yo soy Pam, and we bring you inspiring historias from first-generation Latinas and people of the global majority. No se te olvide, subscribe, hit the like button, ring the bell so you never miss our cafecito time. And of course, for more stories, you can tune into Café con Pam podcast también. Bueno, el día de hoy, this conversation it made me feel some type of way when I received, there's a thumbs up, when I received the information and internally we talked about it, I was quite confused because this is an article called Modernizing Machismo. And my question to you is, how do you feel if you hear we must modernize machismo or let's modernize machismo? We feel something like, wait a minute, hold up. Well, that's what happened to me. Chispa, the dating app, is launching this initiative, which is designed to help to bridge the gap between old machismo and, I guess, new machismo. It's a campaign that they launched that provides tools for men and women to navigate modern relationships, including something inside of the app that also helps to raise funds for men's education programs. I do think those are needed, and also practical relationship tips, which they co-created this with A Call to Men, which is a leading national violence prevention organization providing training and education for men, boys, and communities of color. So I, of course, once I read a little bit more about it, I was like, well, first, I do think we need to have the conversation either way because the name was a little bit interesting, and then I read more on it, and of course, I was like, well, yeah, let's talk about it. I think this is important, and they gave us some stats why this is important. 46% of Latina women say that machismo negatively impacts relationships. 43.9% of Latino men are already redefining masculinity through reliability and protection rather than dominance. I think that one's important because as I talk about calladita culture, I think having the opposite side of the gender spectrum be on board, I think it's important. So 43%, almost 50%, we're almost there. All of this led us to have this conversation with Nikki. Nikki Herdocia is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified family mediator who's been with Coral Gables Counseling Center for 7 years. She was working at a trauma center where she worked with victims of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse before she joined the Coral Gables Counseling Center. And she was also a court advocate for domestic violence cases. Nikki specializes in relationship issues, anxiety, depression, life transitions, improving communication, self-esteem, trauma, stress management, sexual issues, struggles with identity, commitment, challenges, LGBTQIA+, family mediation, co-parenting, and early childhood behaviors. She does a lot. Nikki is also a regular contributor to Coral Gables Counseling weekly blog and a regular guest on the podcast, The Counseling Corner, where she discusses, among other topics, relationships, marriage, and parenting. Super long intro to this YouTube video, but I think it's important for us to address the elephant in the room, which is the name of the report or the name of the article, Modernizing Machismo. I hope you feel some type of way, but I really enjoyed how Nikki was able to explain why they chose the name and why they chose to approach it from this lens. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Leave comments, send them to friends, whoever you think will benefit. We have the article linked below. Y bueno, here's my conversation with Nikki. All right. Well, Nikki, welcome to Café con Pam.
Thank you so much, Pam. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy to have you. So, we are today talking about machismo and
Yes.
this collaboration. So, it was a collaboration of between A Call to Men and Chispa to create
hmm
this guide. Tell me more about it.
Yes. Yes. So, Chispa, as you may be aware, is a really great dating app that encompasses a lot of Latinos and the culture behind it, and it kind of opens it up for all kinds of cultural things. And I think a really big topic culturally in family and relationships is machismo. And they have started out this really great program in which they kind of enlighten, educate, not just men and women about
Mm,
machismo and its effects on our culture, on our relationships, on our communication. And there's been a lot of findings. It highlights really how when men and women see machismo differently, the negative aspects, the positive aspects too, because it's not just all terrible. And I think it's really going to help pave the future for a lot of people because we're understanding it so much more.
So, how did it come about? So, the Chispa team get together and would talk to A Call to Men, and they were like, we need to do something about this because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think that it's been affecting the way that men and women perceive themselves and each other.
Mm,
That I think it was kind of like a call to action to improve that dynamic, to improve the communication, and then to improve. I think it's also empowering to both men and women because unfortunately, I think that a lot of the negatives about machismo is that it silences women and their empowerment, but it also silences men because they're not really allowed to be emotional,
mm-hmm.
and whenever you are, there's something wrong with you. So I think it was more than anything to normalize being emotional as a man and being empowered as a woman. So I think it really elevates both genders. And I think that that was really what was behind it, their behavior and how things can change because of this knowledge and because of the experience of understanding and how to implement machismo in good ways and how to kind of eradicate the negative components of it.
Yeah, because my initial reaction when I heard about this as a feminist, I was like, I don't need to modernize machismo. I just need to remove it. I don't want to date someone who's a modern machista. Why? And so, and even I went as far as asking my audience, people in my program, like, what do you think when you read something that says modernizing machismo? And the reaction was, I don't want machismo in my life.
Right.
So, why was that like chosen to modernize machismo instead of removing it?
I think because again, there are there's evolving masculinity. And I think that sometimes when we say things like we want to remove machismo altogether, it almost feels or sounds like silencing masculinity altogether. And I don't think that was the intent on that, but I understand because there is a lot of stigma associated with like, oh, we have to, as women, we have to be seen and not heard. And that's what machismo does. But there are other aspects of it because machismo also silences men, like I was saying. And I think that that's what we're trying to be proponents of, understanding how it affects both men and women, not just women in a negative way, because it affects both, which inadvertently then affects the women in a negative way. Because if the man is unable to emote and unable to communicate his emotions, he's going to react and behave in such a negative way that it's going to affect the women and further, jail us in a sense. So I think that was what the reason behind it was, to understand it instead of eradicate it, because eradicating it almost only looks at how it affects women, but women are affected by how the men are affected as well. And I think that that's what the game was here. We want everybody to improve, not just the empowered women. We want the men to improve too.
What has been the response?
I think it's been accepted a lot more because, believe it or not, in my practice, we see so many men that don't want to express themselves and they don't believe in therapy, and because eso no es de macho, and how dare you, and my
Mm-hmm.
God would kill me if he knew that I was going to therapy, because that's why they weak people or
El loquero, ¿no?
right, estás loco o débil, there's no in between. And I think that this really shines a light on on empowering men to also kind of evolve into embracing their emotions as well.
Mm.
And I think by doing that, it's less likely that the women's emotions are going to be silenced too. So everybody's getting to know and understand our own emotions, and I think a lot of it is women feeling controlled by machismo,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that we overlook that men even feel controlled by machismo because they can't talk about certain things because it's taboo and men don't talk about that. And tú no eres macho if you talk about that. So I think that it comes back to the importance and the significance of freeing everybody, because that's what I think we're pushing forward in understanding what machismo is and what to learn, what not to do. And I think by eradicating it, you're not learning what not to do. You're just kind of deleting it. And I think that that propels the cultural stigmas and what we bring from beforehand and generationally. We need to learn what not to do as well as what to do in order to evolve.
What's your heritage, Nikki?
My dad is Cuban and my mom's Panamanian.
Okay, so I'm Mexican. And I asked this because I think I'm curious about your experience machismo from the countries that you come from, and the machismo that I come from is, I don't know if it's different, and I'm curious to see if there's like a discrepancy or differences depending on the heritage of the person, because this is a conversation that's been said ad nauseum that Latinos are not a monolith and we all come from different cultures and backgrounds and whatnot. And so what do you think about that? Is there a difference? Have you noticed in your practice, even depending on where men come from, is there a different kind of machismo?
I mean, for instance, Mexico is a huge country.
Mm-hmm.
So different areas in Mexico, I think, will do it differently. Just
Yeah.
like I think Cubans that are coming now from Cuba versus Cubans that came before are going to be doing it
Right.
differently. I think modern people, I mean, it also depends, I think, on the level of education, really, how much we've been able to learn and unlearn from before.
It's so layered, no?
Absolutely. So layered. And I think that a lot of Hispanic heritage has to do with men, I must provide, and the women, you must obey. I think that's kind of almost throughout. And I think that we'll find the exception to the rule every now and then in all cultures. But I think for the most part, it's like an umbrella, like you do as I say, and I bring home the bucks, and that's how it goes. And I think that's what we're hopefully, with the help of studies that Chispa is doing and understanding, is what we're trying to get rid of. And we can get into a better place. And I think that um, the challenges that it creates in relationships and in the way that then you rear your children, like, trying to start paving the way to take roles in a different way. I'm sure your grandparents or my grandparents, like, my what is a broom? They don't clean, and they don't
Claro.
rear the children. That's the woman's job. And I think that now so many cultures, Mexican, Cuban, Panamanian alike, they're taking such a stronger role in reversing both of them. So the mom is working, as we know, and the dads are being more involved with the kids and their homework and talking to the teachers, whereas before that was just not done in any of our cultures. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
to answer a very long-winded answer, but I think there's a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences too. But I think the overarching umbrella is pretty similar.
Yeah, because to your point, yeah, Mexico is like a whole world,
Hmm.
and there's so many kind of like pockets of
Right.
cultures even within Mexico.
Hmm.
And like for you being Cuban Panamanian, like there were two cultures, while similar, still
Hmm.
potentially different. I talk about calladita culture,
Hmm.
and through my work, I've uncovered like the 5 wounds that have kept women quiet, dismissed, overlooked, overworked, etc.
Hmm.
And something fascinating is that the women in Mexico, por ejemplo, they tend to be quieter than the women from the Caribbean,
Hmm.
who tend to come from much more matriarchal environments. And like I see it all the time. In Mexico, tal vez there's a little bit more machismo that oppresses women in a way because of religion, because of colonization, because of like so many historical aspects that just generationally, that's how it works. And I'm curious, like, I always see this kind of like dichotomy between Caribbean women and South American, even. And Mexico and Centro America tend to be quieter. And Caribbean and South America is like, oh no, yo crecí en un matriarcado, mi mamá y mi abuela, y like they ruled the world.
La que mandan, right.
Correct. And so with that, when it comes to chispa and dating, have you seen, for example, like some friction there when two cultures collide or multiple? Because at this point, everyone's from everywhere, you know?
I mean, definitely, but I think that a lot of there's so many factors to take into consideration because you can find a feminist Mexican man. You know,
Mm-hmm.
now in today's society, I have patients that they're feminist men that, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing, you know. But it is few and far between, and I think that they are the exception. But definitely, you know, if you cross two cultures that are very like matriarchal, and the women are empowered, and the men are very used to having that machismo, absolutely, you will find so many clashes, which is why I think the more we learn about it, the more we can understand each other and the more we can adapt. You know, if I, as kind of a suppressed emotional alpha male, have affection deficiency disorder, I don't know how to communicate properly to my wife. That's when this all kind of takes in. And I think it's so amazing that we're learning more and more about it. And there's so many more people that are proponents of this dynamic and this kind of movement to learn about it and to progress, to evolve as men and women. But definitely, of course, there's going to be clashes. If, you know, aquí la que mando soy yo, and he's like, "What do you mean? That's not how I was raised. What are you talking about?"
Right.
And you'll see that even on a personal basis. I've seen um, my suegros, for instance, my mother-in-law is wonderful, and she's very much like aquí la que mando soy yo, and my suegro is also like, "What do you mean? Aquí el que mando soy yo." Like, there's
¿De
just so
dónde son?
much Nicaragüenses.
Okay.
So we got a big, like everybody's on there, and they're Central American too. But it's so funny because she's so evolved, like very feminist thinking, and he's very much like culturally speaking and generationally speaking different. And I see this all the time with my patients too, which is why I think it's so important to adopt these different roles. So when we're rearing the children and the future generations to come, that we're able to see, listen, everybody can work, everybody can be affectionate, everybody can cry, everybody can be emotional. This is not just a job for mom, this is not just a job for dad. And I think that that's going to be just such a significant difference in the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we hold our relationships and the way that our dynamics can progress and grow. And beautifully speaking, the more we know.
The more we know. Something that I got from the guide was, well, the name of it, I was like, mm. Then after I read it, then
Te cayó mejor after you read
me
it.
cayó mejor, me cayó mejor. Sí. Then I think es como una invitación to take self-responsibility, because I think for a long time, feminism has been this like fight against the like all of the oppression on women. Pero I think this, like looking at it from a different lens, I think this was a great invitation for men to be like, well, what are you doing to flip the narrative?
Exactly.
Y por ejemplo, hablando, o sea, ahorita pensando that we have parents, grandparents, and children having children,
Mhm.
then like thinking about all the generations that still we are currently in 2025, like there's a lot of dynamics. ¿Cómo alguien puede empezar con esta conversación? Like if a man is listening, o sea, habla con su papá, con su abuelo, o habla con sus hijos. Like, what are you seeing?
I mean, I would love it to be able to sit here and be like, habla con tu papá y explícale. This is all the ways that you've been like inculcándome to be thinking that is really causing a lot of strain in my relationship because my wife wants to kill me because she's not on board with the things that I'm trying to implement in my house. Or even like my friendships. I'm you know, further stigmatizing women and sexualizing them and all these things que hacen los machistas and why you're doing it wrong. But I hate to say things like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I think that if
Mm,
they're open-minded enough to say, interesting, I'll take that into consideration. And I think a lot of men and women are open, no matter what the age and the culture, they might be. But I think my fear is that the majority might be like, no, hijo, tú estás loco. You have no idea what you're talking about. Así no son las cosas, and I'm not going to change my mind. If you're lucky to find the exception of people before you that are open enough to change, beautiful, amazing. You're lucky, more power to you. But I think our responsibility, like you were saying, is to look within ourselves to change our attitudes, our perspectives, and then be able to then further that for the future generations. I think our focus should be on our present and our future generation. Again, I would love to go back and like try to convince some of these people of of the things that we're learning and the things that we're adopting as a new culture and as forward thinkers. But I think it's less likely to be able to get through than it is for us ourselves to hold that responsibility, to look within, to look at each other, and to look forward. And I think it might be easier, hopefully, to instigate that positive growth in ourselves and in our future than it is in our past.
For sure. ¿Y cómo tú invitarías a esos hombres que están escuchando, por ejemplo, that are like, uy, pero I don't want to disappoint my dad? You know, like it's this, how could they create safety within themselves to move forward with it?
Okay, so what I had mentioned before, this like alpha male tug of war, that there's a
Mm-hmm.
need to exert this dominance. And in every disagreement, and if they lose, they're like less than, or they're weak, or they're not really a man. I think that that's what I want them to then revisit. What really defines a man to you? Not what you find that defines a man, what your grandfather would have thought, or what your papa or your tío thinks is a man. What do you feel is a man? And then look at the person next to you, your friends, your relationships. What do they define as a man? Because I think realistically, what's important today is what I feel is the definition of the role of a man or the role of a woman, and what your partner or your friends, the people that you associate with you today,
Mm.
because we don't choose our family. We love them and they're wonderful and magical. And as a Hispanic person, eso no se va nunca. I don't care where you come from. Oh, just don't talk to your mom. Well, I don't know about that. In this culture, it's difficult to do something like that. But I think we have to kind of make peace and understand their insights or their perspective might not match with mine. And I have to maybe make peace with that. And that can be done again with psychoeducation, with therapy, really making peace with yourself, with what
Mm.
you feel you align with more with your values. And they might be definitely familial values that come from before, but newly adopted values, because now you have different perspective. Again, you have more experiences, exposure, education, like we're saying. And I think that that's what we want to be able to focus on, and how we define what we feel is important, what our values are, what our instead of our family of origin, what our nuclear family. What do I want my daughter to think? What do I want my son to think? What do I want the future leaders of this country? How do I want them to see
Mm-hmm.
things? Because if we continue to promote suppression and like calladita te ves más bonita, do you really want that? And that's what I want to be able to help people empathize with the people that are not the same as you or different, and what the future may hold if we continue to promote that suppression and that encarcelación of emotions.
Yeah, for sure. What about queer couples or queer people? Do you see machismo affecting queer people?
Yeah, I mean it's the same cultural values.
Mm-hmm.
I mean they may be with same-sex individuals that have different values. It doesn't really matter. I think it's across the board, because I mean, I could be a man married to a man, and if he feels that he has more dominance because he makes more money than me, he's machista just the same way.
Yeah.
And I think that if I as a man are more expressive with my emotions, is he then going to see me as the weaker one of the relationship because I don't have the affection deficiency disorder that maybe he has, because it was, pulled it was it was really pushed on him from the machista grandfathers that he had or whatever. And I think that it's the same across the board. People always really focus on women and men, but it's not. It affects absolutely every kind of dynamic relationship, people. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I think the common is that we see so much of the women are suppressed, but I feel like, okay, you can also be suppressed if you're financially not at the place that your partner is, or if you think in a different way, or if you are more, I guess, independent or free. Oh, que te pasa? What you need to be able to, be okay with your partner thinking of it. And I think that goes across the board, whether it's queer couples or say, I mean, it doesn't matter. I think it's just everybody's affected by it. The more we know and understand it, hopefully the less we're going to be negatively impacted by it.
What about children? How is this? Because I have you seen Adolescence? I recently watched it, and I'm like,
No, I
oh
haven't.
my.
I haven't. No,
Have you heard about it?
I have. A couple of my patients actually were like, "You need to see this." I'm like, okay, I gotta watch this.
It's intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it talks about basically machismo in a way that like the whole Andrew Tate like personification of the modern man, whatever that looks like, of
Mhm.
like ancient like patriarchal ways to dismiss women and all this stuff, and like considering women property and all the old stuff. But it's kind of like coming back with teenagers now. And of course, like they're not on Chispa, and eventually they'll grow up to be there. And so, have you seen any, like, how does that affect?
Unfortunately, I think that the more exposure we have to the present circumstances in the government and everything else, I think they're going to think that it's cool. And if people in leadership roles are thinking this way and they're suppressing and they're pushing these agendas, they're going to think, well, that's the norm. Look how
Mm,
look what a position of power these people are at, and they think this way. So I must think that it's cool. I need to adopt that. Which is why the education, we have to come in hard with the education so that we can break those cycles, because it's difficult to combat like as big of a network and as big of a reach as we're seeing right now on TV and social media and everywhere. You have this exposure that it's, well, this is okay and this is a cultural norm and this is tradition and tradition is correct. And I think that it's easy for developing minds to absorb that as
mm,
reality. It's what I guess it's supposed to be, and I shouldn't ask questions because these people are in a position of power, and I'm supposed to, you know, respect people in a position of power, and they're the authority of a country. So who am I to think that it's not supposed to? But I see a lot of both, because I also see a lot of teenagers that are very, I mean, very, very pro feminism and absolutely anti it. No way. I'm not going to be suppressed, and I know my rights, and I know. So it really, I think it also depends on where, at least where in the country, where in the world, and how much of a voice different segments of the world give individuals, give children, give women, give men, that these platforms can be made, like this program that Chispa is proposing. This is a great platform. Now, who's going to allow their kids to have access to this beautiful platform? And that's what we want to try to push, because the more people have access to this kind of information, the more that we can hope that we're going to break the machismo cycle without feeling weak, and we're going to upgrade our emotional software, and we're going to learn to share the load, and I don't have to take it all and you say quietly, we can share the load. And
mm,
I think we're able to redefine strength. I think that's really the important part, is what is strength?
for sure.
Because what my parents or my grandparents thought was strength may not be what aligns with what I define or what you define as strength today. And I think that's what we want to be able to figure out, how to communicate instead of command, and
Hmm.
still open it up to for them to make their own decisions, but at least expose them to all the information and not just to find out about based on what's going on presently, if that makes sense.
Totally. Do you recommend, por ejemplo, porque we Latinos, I mean, we have like multi-generational houses all the time. And
Right.
so there's all of this dynamic of, well, aquí vive todo el mundo, you know?
Mhm.
Do you think having a conversation, like sitting at the table and talking to like the multiple generations, is a start to get this communication going? Is it like parents to younger people? Is it a self introspection? What is the first step to get started on this? Read the guide.
Right, read the guide. I really feel like self introspection, I think it starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to understand what your own struggles are, what your own prejudices are, what your own struggle with oppression or machismo or whatever it is, if you understand what yours are first, you may be able to communicate better with whoever's around you, whether it's your parents, your children, your partners, your friends. First, I think it's introspection. First, understand that. Real men do therapy.
Yes.
I think that it'll go a long way when you're able to understand things about yourself, as women as well, by the way.
Yes.
Um, I think that the more that we are able to understand about ourselves, the easier it's going to be to understand. But ask questions. What was it like for you growing up?
Mm-hmm.
What role did you take in the house? What role did you take outside of the home, professionally or otherwise? How did you feel about that role? Not just what was your role, did you like it? Well, no, I really wish that I could have, gotten, I was able to get my briefcase and make the decisions as to where we go on vacation, and I couldn't. So what was your role? Did you like it? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Ask questions to your family members that came before you. Figure out how that aligns with you or how it doesn't align with you. But I think the best way to doing that is first with introspection, definitely.
I agree. Be curious because question everything.
Absolutely. Never take just this is what it is. No, it's not. Find out.
Yes, for sure. Anything else you want to add that I didn't ask about this?
Um, I mean, I definitely think that the more exposure we have, like I was saying, exposure for in as much information, psychoeducation. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of therapy. I think it just helps to understand yourself and communicate more effectively. I think that machismo, if not understood, can be kryptonite for any relationship. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that the more that we kind of dissect it, understand it, before we just say, we're not, aquí no somos machismo and punto. Understand what is machismo? What did it do?
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you don't align with it, you have embedded things in you. Like silly things like I might make a plate for my son and my husband before I sit down and eat. And I am
Yes.
very forward thinker and I work just as hard and I do all the
Yeah.
things, but it's embedded and you have to understand it. And then not only that, but accept that part of it. Maybe it doesn't bother me so much. However, if it bothers my daughter, I'm going to say, okay, mamita, siéntate tú, come tú primero, because I don't want to push onto her what was pushed onto me. How are you going to eat before your brothers? Are you
Right.
so I think it's a lot more about understanding what aligns with you, what you're at peace with, what you're okay with, and open yourself enough to understand they might not be okay with it, the future. And you have to be at peace with that too, without having to
Mm.
kind of push it onto them. No, but that's not how I did it. Just because that's not how you did it or
Because
that's not
then
how
the
you
cycle
experienced
repeats.
it. Exactly. So being mindful, that's why the introspection is so more important. Being mindful of what was okay with you and understanding and opening yourself up to the idea that maybe it's not okay for them and you have to make peace with that and be like, okay, well, it might not always be easy, by the way.
For sure.
That's the way to go. Try to help yourself be open to the changes and the differences in what's to come in the future.
See, especially with the cultural, historical ways. I remember a friend once, because I'm the rebel I was like, why are you, like, he has hands? He
Right.
can serve himself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And having a conversation with a friend, she was like, "Well, my dad was like, I get home from work and en botas arriba, like botas en la mesa, en el sillón, like
Mm-hmm.
now I'm here to be served." And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh hell no, no,
Right. Right.
he has hands, he can do whatever he needs to do,
Y se lo ensucias, límpialo.
right? Like,
Right.
And so talking to your point of like sometimes you bring things that you don't even realize.
Right.
That's basically what was happening because she was like, you know what, you're right. You're right. He has
It's so
hands. He
funny.
can make it
Mhm.
happen.
And it's so funny because it can be such an internal conflict. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember, like it's so funny because you even see the internal conflict with your mom and your grandparents. I remember my mom would say like, like clean up after yourselves que la criada se quedó en Cuba all the time. But if my brother would get home, ay mi amor, siéntate, ¿qué quieres? ¿Te sirvo algo? And I'm like,
Yes.
what do you mean?
Excuse me. Yes,
So I
for
think that
sure.
even inside of them, there's an internal conflict. So how are we not going to also have sometimes internal conflicts that we struggle with? And again, that's where the introspective come in, like the introspection comes in. So we can figure out what we're okay with, what we're not okay with. What do we have to make peace with? What do we want to
Correct.
change? What do we want to promote for our future generations? And I think that is a huge part of it.
Yeah, the internal conflict is very real, and I think that's also part of the invitation of it not just being for men to like change, but also internally for all the humans dealing with.
Absolutely. It goes across the board because I almost
Correct.
feel like if we just push on this exposure, this education, this learned positive changes to their behavior only to the men, to the machistas, then we're really doing a disservice because there's internal conflicts in women as well. In
Who enabled it
exactly, absolutely. We push for
at
it.
some
No, no,
point.
siéntate tranquilo, sit down.
Exact.
And I think it's the more that we're able to learn in ourselves as as a species, I think that we'll
Mm.
be able to then push forward and learn better instead of just, oh, you're the one that has to change. No, we do too. And understanding ourselves will also get us to understand them better. And like, oh, okay, this is a learned behavior. He's not like a terrible person. This is a learned behavior. He hasn't unlearned yet. He has work to do. So do I. And
Hmm.
this is how we go about it.
I think of a conversation I had with someone at a conference who was telling me, and I laugh about it now because I was like, what just happened? She was an older woman, Latina, Mexicana, in fact. And she said, I wouldn't let my, well, I don't know what we're talking about, but she said, I wouldn't let my daughters wear shorts because that's that's too, it was summer and people were complaining that it was like hot. She was like, even with this heat, I wouldn't let my daughters, I have two daughters, and I wouldn't let them wear shorts because, like, and I'm like, oh, so it's about that. Like, it's their fault to have a
Right.
body.
Hmm. How dare you be provocative?
Right. And I was like,
Kill me.
so it's your daughter's fault? Like, please help me explain.
Hmm.
And she could not understand. So it's like very layered to your point. It's like it does.
And it's also like it to that specific example, it's not their fault, but I want to protect them because it's the other
Mhm.
person's fault who's then going to do something that may be inappropriate or abusive to my daughter because I let her do this. And but is it her that should be suppressed and
Right.
die of heat, or is it the other people that should learn on what's appropriate and what's not? And I think that's
That's
the
where the
conflict.
conversation comes in.
That's exactly where it comes in. That's the
To be
conflict.
like, it has nothing to do with her body and her showing her legs,
Hmm.
and everything to do with how your brain was trained to see women as objects.
Correct.
And
That's
let's
exactly
talk
right.
about that, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm. So much.
So much. It is so much. And again, it is just layers and layers and levels. And the same people from the same family can think so differently. They were raised in the same house by the same two parents, and they could think just so differently. And it's experiences, it's exposures, it's a lot of things that sway us, which is why the more you understand yourself, the likelier you are then to communicate more effectively, understand your partner, and help the future generations.
For sure. Any links or places where you want to share for more resources, whether people can find you or Chispa or whatever you want to share?
So I'm a marriage and family therapist. I work for Core Gables Counseling, and pretty much the bulk of us they were at private practice, and we are quite forward thinkers, and we try to be. And programs like this that we're working with Chispa and collaborating with them is really really a wonderful opportunity for us as well as for the people who are going to get access to all of this. But yeah, we have coregablescounseling.com. We have blogs and sources that we talk about. But Chispa is a really, really wonderful resource for Hispanics and Latin American people who are struggling with adopting the previous cultures with the modern cultures. And it's really great to collaborate with them. So I'm really happy that you are propelling their platform to do so.
Yeah, for sure. Chispa actually sponsored Cafe Con Pam at some point. And so it was like dating in Spanglish.
Yeah, that's exactly this. Everything is in Spanglish now, which is awesome.
Super awesome. Amazing. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for coming to Cafe Con Pam and sharing all the things. I think this conversation could go for hours on
Oh,
end.
absolutely. Hmm.
And, we could, like, it would be fun to do like a panel and bring different generations and be like, how
Oh
did you
yeah.
grow up?
Hmm.
And how did you, like, deal with it or didn't? Because maybe the voice wasn't quite there yet.
That's exactly it. The voice is what we're trying to, I think, tweak
Mm.
and empower at this point for everybody. But thank you so much for having me, Pam. It was such a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking again so we can
Yes.
continue to dissect all of this.
Yeah, it's so needed. We need to clear this up. Thank you. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. How did it go? If you're ready to go deeper, of course, I invite you to join the Cafe Con Pam Supporters Club. This sometimes gives you access to longer Q&A audios, and mainly what it does is it helps the show grow. Your contributions help us keep going. The link is in the description. Y bueno, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I hope it brought some fun thoughts for you. Until next time, stay grounded, stay connected, y como siempre, sigue brillando. Nos vemos en nuestro próximo cafecito.
Sabrosura pa' ti que